How wide open is the window of opportunity for the Milwaukee Brewers? We're going to find out in a Brewers Locked On MLB crossover starting now.
You are Locked On MLB. Your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Fans, and welcome to a Locked On MLB, Locked On Brewers crossover. This is the podcast we talk about all of Major League Baseball or just the Brewers all season long. I am the host of Locked On MLB. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Right over there is the host of Locked On Brewers. Sign in, please.
Chuck Freimund, longtime sportscaster here in the state of Wisconsin, sports talk show host, first year proud host of Locked On Brewers.
That's right. Well, we're going to have a... by the way, you can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. And for those of you who like to log in and leave comments, be sure to put the hashtag EverydaySully there so I know who's listening every single day. Thanks so much for making us your first listen and making Locked On Brewers your second listen. Or if Locked On Brewers your first listen, come on over here. Go float down the river, Sully, and have me be your second listen. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram, or whatever Twitter's called these days, or you can subscribe here on YouTube. My personal handle for Twitter is Sully Baseball, and it's Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Chuck, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Chuck Freimund, Freimund. We're on all the podcast downloads, the number one brewer podcast on the internet, Google, Spotify, Apple, to name a few. And of course, search Locked On Brewers on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell there. It'll alert you every time you drop an episode here on Locked On Brewers, covering all the off-season news, just like you are, Sully.
All right, now today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bet with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. And before we get into the business, let's go through the trivia question. The trivia question from yesterday's show was the first ever number one draft pick ever selected when they started the draft in 1965. Do you know who the first ever draft pick was? Do you know who it was?
Rick Monday?
It was Rick Monday. The question was, who was the second pick?
The second pick?
Yep.
Oh, God. It wasn't Bobby Valentine, was it? He was number one, wasn't he?
No. It was Mets pitcher Les Rohr.
Would have never guessed it.
Exactly. He pitched one game for the 1969 Mets.
Okay.
Now, here's an interesting fact. The first two drafts, people like to criticize Charlie O'Finley, the former owner of the Oakland A's, for being crazy and making wrong baseball decisions, but he also was the GM of that team. Now, the first two picks, the A's had the first overall pick in the first ever draft, and they drafted Rick Monday, who went on to have a very nice career, became an all-star, and ultimately the A's flipped him for Ken Holtzman, who was a 20-game winner when they won the World Series multiple times. The Mets had the number two pick and whiffed horribly with our fellow Les Rohr. The next year, the Mets had the first pick. Do you know who they picked? Steve Chilcott, who
would have been my guess.
who tied me in every major league category because he never made it to the majors.
Okay.
The A's had the number two pick. Do you know who they picked? Reggie Jackson.
Okay. Same team, same era.
So what I'm saying is the A's got the hang of the draft. Could you imagine if the Mets had drafted Reggie Jackson? Now, Rick Monday was already off the board. Later on in that draft, instead of picking Les Rohr, let's say they picked, I don't know, someone who was picked much later, like Johnny Bench. Imagine if Johnny Bench and Reggie Jackson were on the Mets together. I'm not saying.
Well,
I'm just saying.
They would have destroyed each other. That's
probably true.
They would have. Did you see The Bronx is Burning?
Oh, yeah. Oh, and I've read books and books and books about the Charlie Finley A's. I mean,
yeah.
but it would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's by the way, those sort of what ifs are going to be a big part of my Friday shows from now on. I'm going to be going through. I can't determine if I'm going to call them what if Fridays or alternate universe Fridays. So what I want you to do for my everyday Sully listeners, I want you to help me pick the name of what we're going to call that segment on Fridays. Is it going to be alternate universe Friday or what if Fridays? Basically, we're going to be talking about things that almost happened. A bounce here, a bounce there, a decision to sign this player instead of that, a decision to make a franchise move instead of this one. Or in the case of what I'm going to be doing next week is talk about some of the injuries that teams had just before some of the great World Series and NLCSs that if they had avoided them would have changed the course of baseball history. And one of them involves the Milwaukee Brewers.
Yeah, and I know what direction you're going to go on that one too. See, you already had 5 All-Stars on that team. You had 5 Hall of Famers.
What direction am I going on that team?
Oh, with Raleigh.
Raleigh Fingers. Raleigh Fingers, the best reliever in the American League, was injured going into the playoffs, and the Brewers bullpen blew at least one key game in that.
They still had Pete Ladd, though, who just died.
Yes, may he rest in peace. May he rest in peace.
Good guy. But yeah, I just, people want to blame it on them. But again, you had All-Stars and Hall of Famers up and down that lineup. Still should have beat the Cardinals in 82. I still think they should have beat the Cardinals in 82.
Well, who should have beaten the Angels? Oh, they should have been Brewers with the Angels. The Angels were an all-star team.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. With you look at the
Fred Lynn, who won the MVP.
Yeah.
Baylor, Reggie Jackson, Rod Carew, Bobby Grich, Doug DeSenses, Tommy John in that rotation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember I watched that final game, Game 5, between the Angels and the Brewers. And this was so long ago, the Brewers were in the American League and the Angels were in California.
And they were the California Angels.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when they did the introduction of the lineup, I was just shaking my head going like, wait a minute. The Angels lost this game, right? How did they lose this game?
Mm-hmm.
And then I remembered who was the manager of the Angels. Gene Mauch.
Gene Mauch, yes.
And someone other than me said this, and I wish I can quote who the person was, but Gene Mauch could make any great team good.
He did it to a lot of teams.
Yes, he did it to the Expos. He did it to the Twins. He did it to the Phillies. You give him a great team, and he'll get a good season out of them.
But he always managed to get a job.
Yeah. By the way, a couple of things I just want to cover before we do our big deep dive into the Brewers. I talked, and it looks like Yamamoto has officially posted from the Buffaloes. So the feeding frenzy is going to come about for Yamamoto, one of the top pitchers in the Japanese league, is going to make more money. His great grandchildren can go to law school. They'll be fine. He'll be just fine. And I mentioned the other day about Aaron Nola re-signing with the Phillies, and I'm going to have a conversation upcoming episode with Brett Chauncey of Locked On Astros about how that will affect the Framber Valdez situation in Houston. And a couple other, I mentioned the Lance Lynn agreeing to deal with the Cardinals. I talked a little bit the other day about Brandon Woodruff, and I talked a little bit about the fact that Woodruff has been non-tendered and that he is in a situation where he's pretty much not going to play in he's not going to be at least much of a factor in
2024.
That's the word I was looking for, right? And but it's an interesting situation, I think, because it's an interesting situation in one way, because I think that if you're a team that may be looking forward to the 2025 season, that picking him up and saying, all right, we're not getting much of a next year, but he may be able to contribute in a year, if you're a team that has their eye for in a year from now, that might be a great pickup. What was the Brewers' situation when they decided to just give up on him?
I just don't think they wanted to pay the 2 years, because you probably would have had to give him a 2-year deal. Mm-hmm. And you would have had to pay for 2024, pay for 2025. I mean, he says he's going to come back at 2024, but Sully, realistically, probably 2025 and you're banking on a guy with a shoulder injury. Now, I think Mark Attanasio, the Brewer owner, just got gun shy. See, the Brewers, when they sign guys like that, when they take chances, it's got to be at a low rate. They can't afford to have a deal where they're paying $25 million over 2 years and the guy's not pitching or he never pitches again. They gave a couple of bad. I think Yelich is a bad contract. I think Ryan Braun is a bad contract when he was playing. So Mark Attanasios give 2 very big long-term contracts like that, and it's burned him. And I think that's what he looked at here. I just think that he didn't want to pitch. He didn't want to pay for a guy who was not going to pitch in 2024, even though Woodruff says he's coming back later in the year. But they didn't want to roll the dice. The margin of error is so thin with the Brewers of, financially trying to sign guys like that, because they got to hit on everybody.
Right. Well, look at it. It's called making bets.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about making bets with another player named Corbin Burns. But first, I was mentioning making bets. Let's talk about FanDuel. Now, look at this. Is the NFL season. Evidently, there was a game between the Chiefs and Eagles today. I just found out about it. But if you're going to be making any bets on it, go to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Who won tonight, by the way?
Philadelphia, 21-17. I had the over, of course. I should have let everybody know that I had the over, because that would have meant to go under the 40.
There you go. Was Taylor Swift there?
I don't know. I don't remember seeing him, but I know her. But I remember her boyfriend, Travis Kelce, dropped a few passes in the fourth quarter that hurt his team. They never showed her. They showed the mother, because his brother was playing for the Eagles, but I don't think she was. She's overseas, I want to say.
Well, I know. I think we better shake it off. If you're thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use that there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, Taylor Swift appearances, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. I didn't sing anything, so we're not going to get any copyright situation. Now, excuse me.
Sully, are you going to live?
I don't know. I'm choking. I'm choking.
Yeah,
I was reviewing the Brewers in the postseason, and I just started choking badly, and I don't know how to make of it.
Well, that's the par for the course for our team.
Yeah, I'm sorry, everyone, if you had to sit through that. I sound like Jim Leland in a playoff game. You're talking about having to hit with every contract. I'm just going to say one name, just a total random, Corbin Burns. What is the fate? What is going to be going on here? Is he going to be signing long-term with Milwaukee? And, what's the situation going to be? Or is he going to be, first and foremost in the trade market?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think he's going to sign long-term with the Milwaukee Brewers. And he's going to go to arbitration. Maybe they might trade him before that. I don't think they're going to settle. Corbin's been unhappy with the Brewers this past year because, they went to arbitration last year and the Brewers wouldn't give it on $750,000. I understand it because, the Brewers aren't going to pay $750,000 for a player more if he's not going to be here long term. So I think they are going to try to trade him in the offseason because they could let him play and pitch next year, but he's not going to. There's no way. There's no way they're going to be able to sign him to a long-term contract. And that really hurts the team because they're going to be without Woodruff and they could be without Burns if they trade him in the offseason.
Right.
So you're talking about really the strength of your team. The top two guys in your starting rotation are not going to be, could not be, may not be on the opening day roster.
Yeah, and this just a few years, just in 2021,
Mhm.
this looked like it was going to be a pitching-oriented team for the next
Yep.
bunch of years.
Yeah.
And here we're sitting here. I mean, I know I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it is interesting in one point because the Cardinals wet the bed so badly last year, and the Brewers did emerge as, especially since the Cubs couldn't get out of their own way, and both the Pirates and the Reds had nice stretches, but the Pirates were a playoff team in early June, and then the Reds became a playoff team in mid-June and into July. And I think both of them have some talent in their team and are trying to make strides going into 2024. But I remember last year, I was saying the only team looked like they were putting together a winning team was St. Louis, and St. Louis just did an absolute Hindenburg. So, I mean, I hate to be Pollyanna about this. The Cubs are going to be improved, obviously, a little bit, but I don't see them making a gigantic leap forward. This still looks like it could be the Brewers' division.
Well, they got to get some runs. They got to score some runs. They got to find some way to score some runs. And that would be plugging up the two spots on the corners because they don't get nothing. They don't get anything offensively from those two positions, first base or third base this year. I thought they might re-sign Mark Canha. They didn't. They didn't tender him. They traded him to Detroit. So, but offensively, if they're not going to have those two guys at the top of the rotation, which it probably looks like that's going to be the case. No Burns. You better get better offensively. But they were just so bad, Sully, this year, scoring runs and all that they lean so heavily on their pitching staff. I don't see them being able to lean as heavily on their pitching staff this upcoming season. Because right now, Freddie Peralta would be your number one starter if you traded Corbin Burns. Freddie's a good number 3. He's not a number 1. He had a great year by his standards so far, and he's still growing as a pitcher. But he's gonna. I don't look at him as a number 1. They got to get better offensive. They got to find some way to score some runs and get some players in here who can move guys around the base paths. Because too often this past season, we're sitting here and it's 6th or 7th inning and it's 1-0 or 2-1, or 0-0. And it's like, somebody please score. And these pitchers are keeping them in the ball game, and the bullpen was great last year too. We'll see if some of those guys in the bullpen are able to equal, but you have to prove the offense.
Let me ask you about like Jefferson Cuero or Jackson Chourio or Tyler Black. Despite what I call the presidential 3, because all 3 of them have a first name that is the last name of a former president.
I never
Jackson,
thought of that.
Jefferson, and Tyler. If there was a Harding, Pierce, Buchanan, and Johnson, we could hit all of the obscure presidents. There's got to be an Arthur out there somewhere.
I think that's all. I think you just named 2 of my divorce attorneys, but that's all right.
Well, look at the law firm. Well, the law firm of Jefferson, Jackson, and Tyler. By the way, I just noticed that myself. I saw Jefferson, Jackson, and Tyler. Wait a minute. Yeah, there you go. They're all presidents. All of them. And it's an election year, so maybe we can. Are any of those 3 ready for the show and could give the team a boost in on the big league level?
Well, Jackson Chourio is right now the 2nd or 3rd rated, the 2nd or 3rd best minor league prospect.
Yeah, exactly.
And he could win a spot during spring training. They have a crowded outfield. They have a lot of young guys out there. So he could still win a spot, and they could deal with some of that young talent they have there in the outfield. But, Chourio, he's doing well in Venezuela. He did well at AAA. He's, he tore up AA down at Biloxi. So, he'd be, unless he fell on his face, I think he's got a shot at making the roster. Tyler Black, maybe so too, at third base. Or maybe first, one of the corner spots. He's either to play first or third base.
Right.
Jefferson, I don't know about Jefferson just yet. He's got major league potential. I don't know if there's a spot for him just yet on this roster, but the other 2 guys, definitely.
Well, I'm going to push back on you a little bit, Chuck. Now, look, I'm not trying to tell you. You've obviously forgotten more about the Brewers than I ever will. I still think Larry Heisel is playing. But when you say in one sentence they need as many runs, their offense is dead, and then you say they've got a crowded outfield, there's part of me is saying, do you know what? At some point, if someone's the best player, and you may have to push Tyrone Taylor aside, you may have to push someone else. I don't think there's this team's offense. I don't think anyone, Christian Yelich included, that you can look at as like, oh, you're unmovable. You're unmovable. I mean, Yelich had a disappointing year last year, and yes, you're probably going to give him a little more rope than somewhere else. But at some point, maybe you look at Yelich and moving to first or moving to the designated hitter role if it means getting a young, exciting player into your damn lineup.
Sully, you have been listening to Locked On Brewers. I could tell because this is what I've been talking about on the show. I'm not opposed to trading Christian Yelich at all and unloading that contract to somebody like the Dodgers. You might have to pitch in a little bit financially, but yeah, I'm good with moving Christian Yelich if we can get some pitching, first base or third base. I think the Brewers need to get from underneath that contract. For what I told you like earlier on, the Brewers can't afford to miss on contracts. When they signed Yelich, they signed him with the intention of him being one of the best players in the game. He's not.
Nope.
He didn't have a horrible season, but he didn't have a season of, when the Brewers signed somebody to make $26 million, they're at a spot where that guy's got to be an all-star. And Christian wasn't. But it's been like this a long time. He hasn't been good since 2019. So yeah, I'm good with moving. Heck with moving the DH. Heck with moving to the bench or whatever. Move him and get some talent in return, and get maybe a veteran pitcher to return too. Again, you may have to kick off some money on that contract. I also thought about, how about a package deal with Yelich and Burns somewhere.
I was about to say I was waiting for you to take a breath. I was going to say the exact same thing. That's when the Red Sox acquired Beckett, they took on Mike Lowell's contract as well. When the Red Sox unloaded Mookie Betts, the Dodgers had to take David Price's contract as well. Maybe that's going to be the situation. To get out of that contract, you say, look, you want Corbin Burns? You also have to get us out of this contract situation. This is what happens when you put two veterans together like you and I. We think alike. Yeah. We think ahead, and we think stuff like that. Exactly. Yeah. And if you're a team with deep pockets, I know you're probably not going to make that deal with the Cubs, but I also have the mentality, I don't care who you make the deal with. If it's going to make the team better, who gives a damn if it's someone in the same division?
That's right. It's funny. Again, I said that last week. I said, you know what? I don't care if you trade Corbin Burns to the Cubs or the Cardinals or whatever. And that there's an old theory, you can't make a deal with somebody in your own division or the enemy and all that.
What if that's the best deal?
Exactly. I could never understand that mentality, because when that GM trades Corbin Burns to the Cubs and he beats the Brewers, then he looks bad. That's what it is. It's these guys with these egos. So,
here's where it can get better, though. If you trade them and they break down as a Cub, then then it's kind of like as a Boston fan, when Jacoby Ellsbury, whom I loved when he was with the Red Sox and he signed with the Yankees, and I think was in the second game with the Yankees was in a full body cast. There was a sense of, sure, sign him during his breaking down period. Red Sox have him when he wins World Series, and you have him when he's collecting checks at a full body cast. So look at this is why you get veterans together. You need veteran experience.
You do. You need veterans to win. Yeah, you could rebuild, and the common thing is with the sports.
Chuck Freimund talking right through the commercial break there. Talking right through. You talked right through the commercial break, and I love it. I love it. That's how much. That's how much you love. That's how much you want to talk Brewers right there. We're back. We're back with Chuck Freimund. He didn't stop talking. He didn't stop talking.
I hope they caught some of my wisdom of words.
Everything you said was brilliant. Everything you said was brilliant. And in fact, let me tell you something. It's the kind of thing that you want to see, streamed 24/7. Now, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on the YouTubes and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. You may even see your pal Sully, or you may see Chuck Freimund, or you may see Stacy Gotsulis. You may see a lot of people on there. So check it out.
Yeah.
Check it out. If you're feeding your baby, and it's 2:30 in the morning, it's on. I guarantee you, it's on. It's on. It's on. It's on. Hey, in our last segment here, I do want to talk a little bit. Obviously, losing your manager to the Cubs, that was everyone in their cow thought he was heading to the Mets. Didn't happen. The Pat Murphy years have begun. They brought in a guy who does have major league manager experience, albeit in an interim situation with the Padres. But he is someone who is experienced with the team.
Mhm.
So at least in my estimation, they're trying to basically have some sense of continuity. They could very well have just started fresh, but that's, Pat Murphy, good baseball man. What's the thoughts process here as the Pat Murphy era has begun in Milwaukee?
Well, it just seems like we're going to have co-managers here with Pat Murphy and Ricky Weeks as the associate manager. There's never been a title like that.
That was an associate manager.
Well, it just sounds like he's the manager in waiting. I mean, one of two things. It sounds like, okay, if Murphy falls on his face, fans are going to be calling for Ricky Weeks to take his spot, okay? And it also sounds like Ricky Weeks is an intern to Murphy. He's learning the game. And then when Murphy, whenever he decides to step aside, it's Weeks' job. So is it Murphy, the manager? Are they co-managers? What's going to happen here? It's just really confusing because when Counsell was manager or anybody else in Major League Baseball, you know who the manager is, the bench coaches, the pitching coach is Sully. But in this case, you assume Murphy's the manager. But when they had the introductory press conference, who was sitting at the press table? Matt Arnold, Pat Murphy, and Ricky Weeks. When you name a new manager, who has their bench coach, associate manager, who has their assistant coach next to him?
At least give him a press conference. At least let the guy have a press conference.
But they did it with Ricky Weeks next to him.
Yeah, I know. It's surreal.
Isn't that weird?
That is surreal. Like,
yeah.
But just, call him the bench coach. Say he's on our coaching staff.
Yeah.
Everyone knows Ricky Weeks is someone who may very well be a fine manager and everything like that. But can you give Pat Murphy a little bit of wiggle room? Yeah. By the way, Pat Murphy took over when Bud Black was let go of the Padres.
Mm-hmm.
But one man, this is not the trivia question, but because I'm going to tell you, but in between Bud Black's firing and Pat Murphy, there was an interim manager for one game. Do you know who the interim manager was for one game on that San Diego team?
Rick Monday.
Dave Roberts.
Dave Roberts, really?
Dave Roberts.
Okay.
Technically managed one game for the Padres, and the next year he replaced Don Mattingly and has been the Dodger manager ever since.
I feel like Dave Roberts is always in the hot seat.
Yeah, he is. I'm living here in LA, and there are people who want him out
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I don't get it really.
He makes some strange managerial decisions, but so did Francona, so did Joe Torre. So did Casey Stengel. I think that it would be rough. There are some people who thought he may have been ousted this year after 2 straight years, and they've combined for one playoff win. Although winning 100 games each year, I think it would be brutal to have let him go this year because, there were so many injuries to the Dodgers starting pitching staff. I don't know if you remember this. I was an opener one game. They brought me in. They said you're only going 2 innings, but let's make it happen. I was joking because I have a kid in my special ed class that I teach. I have a kid who's on the spectrum who's a huge Dodger fan. And I was joking with him at the beginning of the playoffs. I said, you're going to pitch. You know that, right? He's like, no, I don't think. No, I'm not. Yeah, you're going to get Dodger to call you to pitch. And when I saw that Clayton Kershaw only lasted a third of an inning, I wrote to one of my teacher aides, and let's just call the student D. I said, D only recorded one fewer out than Clayton Kershaw did. How could D have done worse than Clayton Kershaw? But yeah, it's tough you can't blame Roberts for that.
No.
And they had freaking Lance Lynn starting one of a do or die playoff game. So I think a lot of the criticism of Dave Roberts is unfair.
I've always thought he's a good man.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
a Boston fan. I obviously revere him.
Oh, sure.
Well, sure. What are your before we wrap up here, what's your one wish list thing, realistic wish list? I mean, obviously you want Ohtani to sign in Milwaukee, but one realistic wish list thing to happen to Milwaukee this offseason.
Well, I think realistically, I would love to see them get I would love to see. You've heard of Pete Alonso of the Mets.
I've heard of him.
You've heard of that guy?
I hear he's a polar bear.
I'd love to have him doing whatever he wants to do at first base for the Milwaukee Brewers. We have the polar plunge in Milwaukee, so if he wants to do that, more power to him. I want Pete Alonso. That'd be my Christmas list. If you could put Pete Alonso, I'd trade anybody not named Jackson Churio for Pete Alonso, put him at first base. I know he's got 1 year left, I believe it is, until he hits free agency, but I'd take my chances with Pete Alonso.
Are you listening to me? If the Dodgers don't sign Ohtani, you do a 3-way trade. The Dodgers take Yelich and Burns, and then a couple of young players are coming back, and you send some of those young players to New York, and Pete Alonso comes over.
Boy, that's pretty complicated.
I am, but I'm a complicated man.
You think that's would all the numbers work correctly for all three of the teams?
I don't know. I'm sitting in my basement in Pasadena, so what do I know? Well, look at Chuck Freimund. Thanks for jumping on. I like doing this crossover.
Absolutely, anytime.
Tell people where they can listen to your show.
Yeah, Locked On Brewers, Google, Spotify, Apple, we're on all the major downloads. YouTube, go to Locked On Brewers on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. We're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then, of course, follow me on Twitter, Chuck Freimund, Freimund.
And let's go over the trivia question here. And you can send the answers to Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, or Locked On MLB Pods on Twister. Might as well call it Twister, because I will not call it the other name. Instagram or down here on the YouTubes. We're talking about the Brewers. We talked about draft picks. Who is the only number one overall draft pick in Milwaukee Brewers history? Don't answer, Chuck. I know you know. I want those answers down there. Okay, John Murphy Jr. and everyone else who loves to chime right in. Okay, Court Snell, come on, Amy out there. I want to see you. Everyone who likes to come in there. All right, Marcel in Switzerland likes to throw in those answers. Come on, let's see it. Brewers have only had the number one pick overall once. Who was it? So, talking about the state of the Brewers, the state of the NL East, and the state of the offseason, and making some really far-fetched trades with Chuck Freimund of Locked On Brewers. I'm your pal Sully of Locked On MLB. Thanks for listening.